Get out of my seat before I call someone who can make you. Marcus Whitfield did not turn his head when he said it. He was already sunk into seat 2A, the window, first class, left side of the cabin, his gray suit jacket draped across the empty armrest beside him like a flag claiming territory that was not his. His briefcase sat wedged beneath the seat in front of him. His phone was raised at eye level, and his voice carried the particular boredom of a man who did not expect to be questioned, because in 41 years of living, almost no one ever had. Amara Johnson stood in the aisle and did not move. She was 14 years old, 5'4", dark-skinned, her hair braided close to her scalp and pinned back with two small brass clips, wearing a faded navy hoodie with the sleeves pushed up and sneakers that had been resoled once already. She had flown this route, Charlotte to Newark, 11 times in the past year alone, and she knew, the way you know your own front door, exactly which seat was hers. She looked at the boarding pass in her hand. She looked at the man in 2A. She did not look away. Charlotte Douglas International Airport, gate C14, 6:52 in the morning, a Thursday in October. The cabin lights were still on their dim boarding setting, gold and low, and outside the window the sky had not yet decided whether it would be blue or gray. Amara had been the 9th person to board. She had walked down the jet bridge with her backpack slung over one shoulder, her boarding pass folded once in her hand, and she had reached row 2 exactly where the airline's own seating chart told her she would. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice did not shake. "That's my seat." Marcus Whitfield lowered his phone 2 inches, no more, and turned his head just enough to let his eyes travel over her, the sneakers first, then the hoodie, then her face, in a sweep that lasted less than a second, and decided everything before it finished. It was not really a look. It was a verdict already written, walking around in the shape of a glance. "No," he said, "it's not," and lifted the phone back into place. Amara held the boarding pass up, flat at his eye level, the way you'd hold up a stop sign. Seat 2A, flight 1147. Charlotte to Newark, that's what it says. He exhaled through his nose, long and theatrical, the sigh of a man who considered his own patience a gift he rarely chose to give. He lowered the phone into his lap this time and turned to face her fully, and for the first time Amara saw him whole, broad through the shoulders. A stomach that pushed at the buttons of a shirt that had fit him better 2 years ago, silver starting to come in at his temples, a watch on his left wrist that cost more than most people's cars, and that he wore the way some men wear a badge. "Listen," he said, and the word arrived already closed, already finished. "Coach is that way." He tipped his head toward the back of the plane without looking at it. "Find a flight attendant. She'll help you locate your actual seat. This is first class." He said the last 2 words slowly, as if she might need the extra time to understand them. 3 rows back in seat 5C, Devon Marsh had already stopped scrolling through his phone. He was 26, a freelance photographer with a growing following on a travel account, and something in the tone of the man's voice, that specific, practiced condescension, made the back of his neck go tight in a way he recognized. He set his phone face down on his knee, not filming yet, just watching, the way you watch weather building on the horizon before you decide whether to run for cover or reach for your camera. 2 rows up in seat 1B, Judge Alina Prout, 66 years old. Silver hair pulled into a low knot, closed the paperback she'd been reading and let it rest against her thigh. She had spent 28 years on the bench of a federal district court before retiring the year before, and there was a particular quality of attention she still could not turn off. The habit of watching a room and clocking, without meaning to, who was telling the truth and who simply believed they didn't have to. At the galley near the front of the cabin, flight attendant Priya Desai paused with a tray of orange juice glasses balanced in both hands. She was 24, 2 years into the job, and she had checked the manifest that morning the way she checked it every morning, carefully, out of habit, because her training officer had once told her that a manifest read carefully was the difference between a smooth flight and a bad one. She knew exactly whose name belonged in 2A. She took one step forward and then stopped, because Amara had already spoken again. "I don't need to find anyone," Amara said. "I already found my seat. You're sitting in it." Marcus Whitfield's jaw shifted just slightly, the muscle there tightening under skin that had gone faintly pink. "I don't know what mix-up happened at the gate," he said, "but I've had this seat for the last 20 minutes. So you can either go find your real seat, or you can stand there holding up the line behind you. Your call. What Marcus Whitfield did not know, could not have known, could not have imagined in the 41 years he had spent building a life on the assumption that the world existed to agree with him, was that in the next 11 minutes, the girl standing in the aisle in a hoodie with Resoled sneakers was going to end his career, end his marriage's last chance at repair, and turn his name into something people would say out loud in boardrooms 3 states away as a warning about exactly the kind of man not to become. He didn't know that yet. He went back to his phone. Amara stood in the aisle, and she waited. If this is the kind of moment that makes your jaw tighten, the kind where you already know someone is about to be dismissed before they've finished a sentence, stay with this one to the end. Because what happens in the next few minutes on this airplane is not just about a seat. It's about what happens when the wrong person decides who gets to be underestimated. Here is what Marcus Whitfield could not see, looking at her the way he looked at her. Amara Johnson had been sitting in seats exactly like this one, in cabins exactly like this one, for most of her conscious life. Charlotte to London in February, a connection through Atlanta that she had navigated by herself at age 12, because her father's meeting had run long, and she'd learned to read a departure board the way other kids learn to read a bus schedule. Charlotte to Lagos in April, a stopover in Amsterdam in June where she had eaten a meal off actual china at 39,000 feet and not thought twice about it, because for Amara Johnson, that particular kind of morning was not a special occasion. It was a Tuesday, she was 14. She spoke English and enough Yoruba to follow her grandmother's phone calls without asking for a translation, and she was working, slowly, patiently, with a workbook she kept in the outside pocket of her backpack, on conversational Portuguese, because her father had told her the year before that the next decade of shipping logistics in the Southern Hemisphere was going to run through Brazilian ports, whether anyone in Charlotte liked it or not. And he wanted her to be ready for rooms. He wasn't sure he'd still be sitting in by the time she was old enough to sit in them herself. Her father was Reginald Johnson, founder and CEO of Palmetto Rail and Freight, a logistics company he had built out of a single leased truck and $11,000 in 1998, in a warehouse district outside Charlotte that most people in the city had never bothered to drive through. 26 years later, Palmetto Rail and Freight moved cargo through 4 East Coast ports, employed just under 9,000 people, and had a valuation that made business journalists reach for the word quiet before the word empire, because Reginald Johnson had never once put his face on a billboard. Amara had sat in the back of a boardroom at age 13 and watched her father's logistics team argue for 40 minutes about a routing inefficiency in the Savannah corridor before she raised her hand, actually raised her hand, like she was still in the 6th grade, and asked why nobody had modeled the rail spur that ran through Society Hill. 6 weeks later, that spur was moving freight, and the company had saved $800,000 in the first quarter alone. She hadn't done it to impress anyone. She had done it because the numbers on the whiteboard had been bothering her for 3 days, the way an out-of-tune piano bothers a person who has perfect pitch. She did not think about any of this standing in the aisle of Flight 1147. She had learned, deliberately, a long time ago, not to reach for her father's name the way some kids reach for a security blanket. Her worth, she had decided somewhere around age 9, could not be a number attached to somebody else's bank account. It had to live somewhere inside her, in the things she actually carried, the discipline, the calm, the refusal to shrink just because a room wanted her to. Her father had taught her that. He had also taught her, 7 years earlier, standing in a parking lot outside a department store in uptown Charlotte after a security guard had followed the 2 of them through 3 floors without ever once being asked to, that anger by itself accomplishes nothing. Anger is fuel. The only question that matters is what you build with it. She had been building with it ever since. So when Marcus Whitfield looked at Amara Johnson and decided she was a kid in the wrong section of the plane, he was not entirely wrong about one thing. She was out of place, just not in the way his glance had decided. She was out of place the way a locomotive is out of place on a bicycle path, not because it doesn't belong on rails, but because the space in front of it isn't built to hold what's coming down the track. She stood in the aisle, boarding pass at her side, and let him go back to his phone. 3 rows behind her, Devin Marsh had turned his own phone face up again, camera angled low across his knee, not recording yet but ready. He had covered stories in 11 states for his following of just under 200,000 people, and something in his gut, honed over 4 years of knowing exactly when a moment was about to become a story, told him this was the beginning of one. Where, Marcus Whitfield said, without looking up, did you get that boarding pass? It wasn't really a question. Amara heard the shape of it land, flat, accusing, dressed up as curiosity. I bought my ticket through the airline's app, she said. Right, he drew the word out, savoring it, and who paid for it. The question dropped into the cabin like a tray hitting tile. Ugly, sudden, impossible to unhear. In row 4, a man in a Panthers pullover glanced up from his laptop and then quickly back down, the particular look of someone who has just heard something and is deciding in real time whether it's worth the trouble of having heard it. That's not relevant, Amara said. I think it is. Marcus Whitfield leaned back into 2A, her seat, her window, her armrest, with the loose, expansive comfort of a man settling deeper into something he's already decided is his. I've had platinum status on this airline for 14 years. I booked this seat 2 months ago. I have never once had a reservation mix-up in my life. So either the gate agent made an error, or he paused, and the pause was not accidental. Somebody handed you a boarding pass that isn't yours. Nobody handed me anything, Amara said. These things happen. He waved a hand, magnanimous, generous, doing her a favor and letting her know it. Probably a glitch in the system, not your fault, but the seat's mine has been since I sat down. So here's what I'd suggest. He said it like he was offering her something. Go find a flight attendant, explain the mix-up. Let them sort out whatever happened at the gate. Okay, good. He lifted the phone again. Amara did not move. 12 seconds passed. He could feel her still standing there. He didn't look, but he felt it, the way you feel a draft from a door that hasn't quite shut. And the feeling irritated him with the specific irritation of a man unused to being ignored. He looked up. Did you hear me? I heard you, Amara said. You said someone handed me this. That's false. You said it's probably a system glitch. It isn't. You said to go find a flight attendant. I'm not doing that because I don't need a conversation with a third party about a ticket that's already valid. I need you to stand up. For half a second, less, something shifted behind Marcus Whitfield's eyes. Some small, dimly lit corner of his judgment registered briefly that this was not how a lost child talked. This was not confusion. This was not a kid who needed help finding her row. He crushed the thought before it finished forming. That was the kind of man he was. Not stupid. Never stupid. Just constitutionally incapable of letting a correction in before his pride had a chance to slam the door on it. You know what the real problem is? He said, louder now, loud enough that heads turned 2 and 3 rows back. This is exactly what happens when people get handed things they didn't earn. They expect to be treated like everybody else who actually worked for it. And when somebody finally tells them the truth, suddenly there's a scene. The word handed hung in the cabin, ugly on both ends, meaning one thing on its surface and something far uglier underneath, and everyone within earshot understood exactly which meaning he intended. Judge Alina Prout set her paperback down on the empty seat beside her. She did not stand yet, but her hands came together in her lap, fingers laced, the particular stillness of a woman who has spent almost 3 decades learning to let a room finish revealing itself before she says a word. At the galley, Priya Desai's supervisor, senior flight attendant Carla Whitmore, had already clocked the situation from 30 feet away and was moving toward row 2 with the brisk, decided walk of someone who had already reached a conclusion without asking a single question. Carla was 48, 20 years into the job, blonde hair pulled into a tight, low bun, a smile she could dial from warm to warning in half a second. She reached the row and addressed Marcus Whitfield first. Always first, that was the instinct, the well-worn groove, before she had so much as glanced at the girl standing in the aisle. Sir, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. Let me get this sorted for you. Marcus Whitfield settled back with a small, satisfied exhale, the exhale of a man watching the world correctly reassert itself around him. He gave Amara a brief sideways look that said, without needing words, see. Carla turned to Amara and dialed her smile to the warmth she reserved for what she privately filed as complicated situations. Sweetheart, can I see your boarding pass real quick? Amara held it out without a word. Carla studied it, Flight number, date, seat, name, the careful scrutiny of someone hunting for a flaw that would make this simpler. There wasn't one. Amara Johnson. Seat 2A, Flight 1147. Issued that morning, stamped at the gate, correct in every line. Well, Carla said, and something behind her professional smile flickered. Just barely. It does say 2A, she said it like a concession wrung out of her. Then she turned back to Marcus Whitfield, and her whole posture softened into a different register entirely. The deference she had never once extended to the 14-year-old standing 4 feet away. Sir, I'm so sorry to bother you again. Would you mind if I just took a quick look at yours too? Just so we can wrap this up. Platinum, 14 years. Marcus Whitfield lifted his phone like it was proof of something. The system knows exactly who I am. I don't carry paper boarding passes. Carla nodded, sympathetic, already building the bridge that would let this man keep his seat without anyone having to say the thing that was actually happening. Of course, there was probably a duplicate assignment glitch at the "There's no duplicate," Amara said. I was assigned this seat when I bought the ticket. It was confirmed at check-in. It was confirmed again at the gate 20 minutes ago. There is no glitch. Carla's smile tightened by a couple of degrees. I understand, sweetie. I just want to make sure we have the full pict. My name is Amara, not Sweetie. A woman in row 5, headphones looped around her neck, a canvas tote with a UNC Charlotte logo at her feet, pressed her lips together and turned to look out the window, the exact posture of someone who has recognized precisely what's unfolding and is calculating in real time what it might cost her to say so out loud. Carla recalibrated, scanning the row for the path of least resistance, and as she had done hundreds of times before in smaller versions of this exact situation, she found it in the person with the least power to push back. Here's what I'd propose, she said, brightening, as if she were offering a gift. We've actually got a lovely window seat open back in row 9. Same class of service, same amenities, just a little further back. I paid for 2A, Amara said. I understand that, but given the circumstances. What circumstances? Amara's voice had not risen, it had not cracked, but something in it had sharpened the way a blade sharpens without getting louder. The circumstance that a man sat down in my seat without checking a single detail. That he's refused 3 separate times to show a boarding pass. That he just told an entire cabin I was handed, something I didn't earn. Which one of those circumstances exactly am I supposed to accommodate? The cabin's attention shifted, not dramatically, no gasps, no scraping of chairs, but the quality of the silence changed, thickened, the way air thickens before a storm actually breaks. Phones that had been angled casually stopped being casual. Devon Marsh was filming openly now, steady, held at shoulder height, and in row 7C a college-aged man had already opened a live stream app, the little viewer counter climbing from single digits into the hundreds within 90 seconds. Marcus Whitfield, emboldened by the flight attendant's obvious alignment, did what emboldened men in his position tend to do when they sense an audience watching in their favor. He leaned back further into the seat that was not his, spread one arm along the top of it, and raised his voice another notch. This is what I'm talking about, he said, to the cabin now, not to her. Kid gets caught somewhere she shouldn't be, and instead of just quietly finding her actual seat like a normal person, she wants to make a whole production out of it. That's the world we live in now. Judge Alina Prout stood up. She did it without ceremony, simply rose from 1B and stepped into the aisle, and when she spoke, her voice carried the unhurried weight of a woman who had spent 28 years telling entire courtrooms exactly when to stop talking. That child, she said, has produced a valid boarding pass for the seat you are currently occupying. 3 times, you have produced nothing. And this flight attendant has declined, twice now, to ask you for it. I want that noted out loud for the record, because I intend to remember it precisely. Carla turned toward her, already reaching for a script. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to. My name is Alina Prout. I sat on the federal bench in this district for 28 years, and I have spent the last 11 minutes watching every part of this interaction. If this airline's actual policy is that the passenger holding valid documentation gets moved so the airline doesn't have to confront the passenger holding none, I would like someone to say that policy out loud so I can write it down. The word record landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water. and the ripples from it reached every row. Marcus Whitfield's face had gone from its usual ruddy pink to something closer to red. "This is absurd," he said. "I'm a senior partner at Holloway Bricker Financial. I fly this route every single week. I am not the problem here." "Nobody said you were a problem," Amara said quietly. "I said you're in my seat." "Then prove it," he snapped, and something in his voice had lost its earlier lazy confidence. It had gone thin, defensive, the sound of a man who has just realized the room is no longer automatically on his side and doesn't know yet how to build it back. "Show me something besides a piece of paper anybody could print at a kiosk." Amara reached into the outside pocket of her backpack, unhurried, and pulled out her phone. She did not raise her voice. She simply opened the airline's app, tapped twice, and turned the screen so Carla could see it, the digital boarding pass, the confirmation number, the seat map with 2A highlighted in the airline's own shade of blue, her photo ID pulled up beneath it from the app's saved wallet. Carla stared at the screen for 3 full seconds. "I need you to actually sit down, sir," she said finally to Marcus Whitfield, and her voice had lost its earlier softness. "I'm going to need to see your documentation now, or I'm going to have to ask you to deplane." "Deplane." He laughed, short and disbelieving, "Over a seat mix-up caused by your own gate agents." "There is no mix-up," Carla said, and for the first time she said it like she believed it. Marcus Whitfield's hand went to his jacket pocket, patted it, patted the other one, and then his phone, scrolling, his thumb moving faster, his jaw tightening with every second the screen failed to produce what he needed it to produce. Because the truth he had known the entire time, buried under 14 years of platinum status, and a lifetime of never once being told no, was that his own boarding pass, printed at a kiosk that morning because his phone battery had died in the Uber, was folded in the outside pocket of the briefcase wedged under the seat in front of him. Seat 4C, not 2A, seat 4C, aisle, economy plus, 3 rows back from where he was currently sitting. He had walked past his own row. He had seen 2A empty, decided it looked better, and sat down in it without checking the number twice, because in 41 years of boarding planes, nobody had ever once made him check. "Sir," Carla said, "I need you to check your bag." "This is ridiculous," he said, but his hand was already moving toward the briefcase, because some small, cornered part of him had started to understand, half a second before his mind caught up, exactly what he was about to find. He pulled the boarding pass free. He looked at it. Seat 4C, he looked at it for a long moment, long enough that the entire cabin watching him could see the exact instant the floor of his certainty gave out from underneath him. He did not apologize. That was the thing about Marcus Whitfield, the thing that would, in the coming weeks, unravel him far more completely than the mistake itself ever could have. He looked at the boarding pass in his hand, looked at the seat number that proved, in his own handwriting-free, airline-printed, unambiguous ink, that he had been wrong from the very first sentence out of his mouth, and instead of saying the 2 words that might have ended this in that instant, he folded the pass, put it back in his pocket, and said, "Fine. There was a mix-up on my end. It happens. No need to make a federal case out of it. You called me a thief," Amara said. Her voice had not changed. It was the same voice she'd used the whole time, level, precise, unhurried, in front of an entire airplane. "You said I was handed something I didn't earn, and now you're calling it a mix-up." "I said what I said in the moment," he snapped. "You want an apology? Fine, I'm sorry there was confusion. Can we move on now?" "That's not an apology," Judge Pruitt said from the aisle without raising her voice. "That's a man trying to close a door he doesn't want opened." Devon Marsh's phone was still recording, steady, unwavering, and the live stream counter in row 7 had climbed past 4,000. Priya Desai, who had been standing frozen near the galley through the entire exchange with a tray of orange juice still balanced in both hands, finally set the tray down on the counter. She had 3 years of seniority under Carla, and a car payment she could not afford to lose, and a training manual in her head that told her exactly whose job it was to speak in a moment like this, and it was not hers. She stepped forward anyway. "Carla," she said quietly, "the reservation's valid. It's been valid since gate check. I confirmed it myself an hour ago." Carla turned, and for a moment something passed between the 2 women. A silent, entire conversation about what it had cost each of them, in different ways, to be standing exactly where they were standing. The pilot's voice came over the intercom then. Calm, even, the voice of someone who had been quietly briefed on the situation by a flight attendant on an interphone line 2 minutes earlier. Folks, we're going to hold at the gate a few more minutes to resolve a seating matter. Appreciate your patience. Marcus Whitfield's face had gone from red to a kind of gray. He understood, in that particular way that only becomes clear once it's too late to undo, that the plane was not going to move until this was finished, and that everyone on it, everyone with a phone, everyone with a memory, everyone with a story to tell later, was going to remember exactly how it had finished. "Sir," Carla said, and her voice now carried none of the warmth she'd extended to him 12 minutes earlier, "I'm going to need you to gather your things. You'll be reseated in 4C, which was your assigned seat, and a member of our ground team is going to want to speak with you before we depart." "You're removing me? Over this?" "I'm reseating you in the seat you paid for," Carla said. "The ground team wants to speak with you because a passenger recorded you accusing a 14-year-old of theft in front of a full cabin, and that recording currently has." She glanced toward row 7, where the live stream number sat frozen at 6,214, several thousand people watching it live. Something happened to Marcus Whitfield's face in that moment that no one in the cabin would forget. It was not shame, not exactly. Shame would have required him to actually accept what he'd done. It was closer to the look of a man watching a wall he'd built his whole identity against. Brick by brick, over 4 decades, begin to crack in a place he could see but could not reach to fix. He stood up. He gathered his jacket, his phone, his briefcase, and for one long moment he stood in the aisle across from Amara, the two of them at the same eye level now, her seated, him standing, the roles of the last 12 minutes fully and visibly reversed, and he opened his mouth like he might finally say the 2 words the entire cabin was waiting for. "You should be more careful," he said instead, "about how you talk to people who could actually help you in life." It was, everyone in that cabin understood immediately, the worst possible thing he could have said because it proved, beyond any remaining doubt, that he had learned nothing at all. Amara looked up at him. She did not raise her voice. "I heard you," she said, "and I want you to know I'm going to remember exactly how you said it." She was not threatening him. She was simply telling him something true, the way you'd tell someone the time. He walked back to 4C without another word, and the cabin, for a moment, went entirely, completely still. No one spoke. No one reached for a bag. No one so much as cleared a throat. It was the particular silence that settles over a room right after something has ended, and before anyone has decided how to feel about it having ended. Judge Prout sat back down. Priya picked up her tray again. Carla knelt beside Amara's row for a moment, her professional composure fully restored, but something genuine underneath it now, something that hadn't been there 12 minutes earlier. "I'm sorry," Carla said quietly, just to her. "I looked at him first. I shouldn't have. I know," Amara said. And then, because she was 14 and had been taught by her father that grace costs nothing and buys everything, "Thank you for fixing it." The plane pushed back from the gate 19 minutes behind schedule. What none of the passengers on Flight 1147 knew yet. What Marcus Whitfield, sitting rigid and furious in 4C with his jaw locked, and his phone buzzing with the first of what would eventually be several hundred notifications, could not have imagined was that Devon Marsh's footage, 41 seconds of it. Beginning with the words, "This is what happens when people get handed things they didn't earn," and ending with the moment Amara Johnson opened her digital boarding pass and turned the screen around, had already been clipped, captioned, and posted. And by the time the plane reached cruising altitude over Virginia, it had crossed 200,000 views. By the time they landed in Newark, it had crossed 4 million. Holloway Bricker Financial's compliance office received its first inquiry from a reporter at 11:14 that morning, before Marcus Whitfield had even collected his checked bag. By 2:30 that afternoon, the firm's head of communications had watched the video 11 times and forwarded it to the managing partner with a single line: "We need to talk about Marcus today before this reaches a client." He was placed on administrative leave by end of business that day. The firm's internal review, conducted over the following 9 days by an outside employment attorney, turned up 2 prior complaints from junior colleagues, both women, both filed and quietly closed without action in the 18 months before Flight 1147, both describing a pattern eerily similar to what 41 seconds of cell phone footage had just shown the entire internet in real time. The pattern had always been there. It had simply never before had a name attached to it that anyone with power was willing to say out loud. He was terminated 14 days later. His platinum status was revoked by the airline that same week, not merely suspended, revoked, a distinction the airline's statement was careful to make. His wife, according to people who knew the family, had already moved out of their house in the Myers Park section of Charlotte by the time the termination letter arrived, not because of the video itself. Several friends would later say, but because of what he'd said to her when she'd asked him, gently, whether he owed the girl an apology, and he had answered without a flicker of hesitation that he didn't owe anyone anything for a misunderstanding. He never did apologize. Not publicly, not privately, not through a lawyer, not through a carefully worded statement drafted by a crisis management firm his sister hired for him 3 weeks after the video broke. He gave one interview to a local news station 11 days after the incident, in which he described the entire episode as a moment blown wildly out of proportion by people looking for a viral clip. And that interview, more than the original video, was the thing that finally and permanently ended any possibility of his professional life recovering, because it proved, on camera, in his own words, that the man who had spent 12 minutes refusing to check his own pocket had learned exactly nothing from the experience of the entire world watching him be wrong. Reginald Johnson did not sue the airline. He had the resources to, and more than enough standing, and his legal team drew up the paperwork within a week, ready to file the moment he gave the word. He never gave it. Instead, 6 weeks after Flight 1147, he announced something else, the Johnson Family Aviation Access Fund, seeded with $4 million, built to do two things: fund free legal representation for travelers who experience discrimination in commercial transit, and in his daughter's name, though she had asked him quietly not to make a fuss about it, establish a scholarship for young black women pursuing degrees in logistics, supply chain management, and aviation law. The first class of scholarship recipients numbered 14. Amara insisted on that number herself once she was told it was her choice, though she never explained to her father exactly why, and he never asked. Priya Desai was promoted to senior flight attendant within 4 months, the airline citing, in language carefully vetted by its own legal department, exemplary judgment and integrity under pressure. Carla Whitmore completed a mandatory bias awareness training program the airline rolled out to its entire cabin crew division that winter, a program built, in no small part, around a case study describing, in careful, anonymized but unmistakable detail, the order in which a flight attendant had looked at 2 passengers, the seat she had offered, and the 14 minutes in which she had the chance to do differently and did not. Judge Alina Pruitt's 4-page written account of the incident, submitted voluntarily to the airline's Passenger Relations Division and later, at her own request, entered into a state consumer protection filing, became one of 3 cited documents in a Charlotte City Council hearing the following spring on discriminatory treatment in commercial travel, a hearing that led, eventually, to a formal request that the airline industry adopt third-party bias review standards for how in-flight conflicts were documented and investigated. Flight 1147 landed in Newark 31 minutes late. It made up 11 of those minutes in the air. Amara Johnson said very little for the rest of that flight. She finished the Portuguese workbook chapter she'd started the week before. She ate her breakfast off an actual plate with actual silverware and didn't think twice about it, the way she never did. She watched North Carolina disappear beneath the wing and then Virginia after it, the fields going gold and brown with the season, and somewhere over the Chesapeake, in the particular quiet of a morning flight where most of the cabin has gone still, she reached into her backpack and took out a small spiral notebook with a cracked blue cover that she had carried, unreplaced, since she was 9 years old. It was almost full. She opened it to the last blank page and uncapped her pen and wrote 3 words, the same 3 words her father had said to her 7 years earlier in a parking lot outside a department store, after a security guard had followed the 2 of them through 3 floors without ever once being asked to, and had never once apologized for it either. She wrote them slowly in her neatest handwriting and underlined them once, the way she underlined only the things she meant to keep. The world corrects itself. She closed the notebook. She tucked it back into the outside pocket of her backpack next to the Portuguese workbook, and she looked out the window at the clouds breaking apart over New Jersey, and she thought about none of what had happened on the ground in Charlotte that morning, because it had already, in the particular way that true things settle once they're finished, stopped being something she needed to carry. Somewhere behind her, 3 rows back, in a seat that had always belonged to him and that he had never once bothered to check, Marcus Whitfield sat with his jaw locked and his phone buzzing in his lap, watching the notification count climb past numbers he did not yet have any framework for understanding. And somewhere underneath the anger, buried deep, unexamined, not yet ready to surface, was the first small crack of a thought he would spend the rest of that year trying and failing to outrun. That he had not lost his career over a seat. He had lost it over the 11 seconds after he'd found the truth folded in his own pocket, and the choice he'd made in those 11 seconds not to say a single true word. If this story moved you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, in a room where you stayed quiet when you didn't have to hit like, so this reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who's ever been told to prove they belong somewhere they already earned their place. And leave a comment. Have you ever been the person standing in that aisle or the person who looked away? I read every single one,